Hello, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, we continue on with the book titled The Secret of Mental Magic, and it is written by William Walker Atkinson. I do have other books by this author. A couple of them are Thought Vibration or the Law of Attraction, The Human Aura, Astral Colors and Thought Forms, and he goes also under pen name in that particular book as Swami Pachandasi, and under the pen name Thurant Q. Dumont, he has the power of concentration and the solar plexus or abdominal brain. And these books you can find in my book playlist. One of those books, I believe it's the Thought Vibration or the Law of Attraction. You'll find that I do have a bio, so you can catch that there, so I don't have to repeat that in this video. I will admit that the title, The Secret of Mental Magic, conjures up a lot of ideas of things that maybe we should not know, and also things that maybe we have the power to do, and then the idea of magic, that there is something mystical about it. So when we look at this, I like the idea that William Walker Atkinson does not want to leave things in the dark. For the most part, it seems that what I've learned, or what I'm learning, is that the West is like behind, like what, we're in the end zone. We're like on the field, but we're not sure. Some of us are like, hey, we're the bases, I think we want to play. And the East, they've been very much aware of this enlightenment, while I think that the word would be occult or esoteric knowledge or wisdom. And when we say and we use the word occult, many times we think about horror films, or we think about black magic, or things that just conjure something like dark. But the word occult, the basic, what does it mean? It means something that's hidden, something that's secret. And even like when you go to get like maybe like a blood analysis, even the doctors might say the occult blood in samples, and they're referring to the blood that they can't see, but they know that's still there. And thinking how new the West is, as such a baby, that means that new in comparison to when we refer to Europe and India and Asia and those places such as the old world. And for as much as the process of evolution has been, there's these esoteric concepts that, as advanced as we are, still those concepts seem so foreign to us and so taboo, and yet there is so much to learn from them, because there's some things that no matter how much we advance in the future, we as humans have this certain thing at our core and how we interact with each other. And it seems that people of those old countries, those old worlds, knew something that we still haven't grasped, or they have been kept occult from us. And when we take a look at religions, we need to also understand that these religions had a base somewhere. They are organized, and they had a birth, and it took a while for them to coalesce into what they are today, the various religions. And so some of these concepts, when we start looking at the deeper parts of religion, there's still some things that are occult in themselves. And when you start looking at the things that they use in their practices, whether honoring someone that dies, or the prayers, or the songs and the hymns, there's a lot of story that can be told about those early roots. So what I like about William Walker Atkinson is that he chose, regardless of what type of heat he was getting from the leaders or the people, the powers that be, that he was exposing this knowledge, it was like, no, enough is enough. And we need to bring these things into the light. Now think about it, when he is talking about this particular chapter here, which has to do with the next thing that he is addressing, which is mental suggestion. Who would benefit from learning about mental suggestion? And keep in mind that you and I, we are being, I would say, bombarded by suggestions of all kinds. Some people are bombarding suggestions at us because they're conscious about what they're doing, whether it's through advertising or in sales. So who would benefit from this knowledge? Anyone. that's in sales comes to mind: insurance agents, realtors, influencers, advertisers. And what I'm learning is that these esoteric or occult knowledge is now not only being studied by science because it has to do with the mind, but it's also being studied and used in sales. I believe that anyone that's in that area of buying and selling is affected by mental suggestion. And so that's where we start, because you might look at something that you bought recently and then you ask yourself, well, what was the influencing factor that took me to make that final decision, to make that purchase? And not to leave another group behind, even though I might say that this group would be in the category of what I would say soft sales, so to speak. Parents are constantly trying to sell their kids into their ideas. And, well, indeed they are. And I'm sure you can look back and see how many of your choices were born out of suggestions and gentle prodding of your parents, at least up until the age of rebellion, that is. And I'm sure since then you've adopted your own style of employing suggestions to achieve a certain outcome. You're doing it naturally. Now, could you imagine learning how to home it in and to also understand how to protect yourself or be aware when this is, being employed on you? So this topic may be one that will be worth time investing in as the author breaks down the different types of suggestions from active to passive. Imagine that. So with that, let's turn the page. The Secret of Mental Magic by William Walker Atkinson. Lesson 3. Mental Suggestion. Every student of psychology and mental science has heard and read much of that phrase of mental phenomena called mental suggestion. Much has been written and taught about it, and the term has been claimed by some teachers to cover all phases of mental influence. I do not entirely agree with these extreme advocates of suggestion, however, for I find much in the subject that calls for a further explanation. But, nevertheless, I feel certain that mental suggestion plays a most important part in almost every instance of this class of phenomena and must be seriously considered by all careful students of the subject. Combined with mentative induction by means of mentative currents, it accounts for nearly every phase of phenomena of mental influence. Therefore, I shall devote an entire lesson to the consideration of its underlying principles, laws, and method of application. I feel that no one can be a successful practitioner of telementative influence or personal magnetism who is not as good suggestionist, because the very knack of projecting strong suggestions is necessary for the forceful projection of mentative energy and mental currents. What is mental suggestion? While all who have examined the subject are aware of the force and effects of mental suggestion, few have found it possible to correctly define or describe the term, or to explain it to others. And so in this lesson, I shall have to undertake a task that many other writers on the subject have dodged. But I feel assured that my theory of mentative induction and the two poles of the mind will enable you to form a very clear and comprehensive knowledge of the underlying laws of the subject, so that, understanding it from the ground up, you will be able to apply its method of application to the best advantage. The term mental suggestion, used in the sense of personal influence, means that influencing or controlling of the mental states of others by means of words, actions, appearances, etc. The phases of suggestion. I divide the phenomena of mental suggestion into two general classes or phases. 1. Active suggestion, and 2. Passive suggestion. As follows: by active suggestion, I mean the induction of mental states in others by means of positive command, affirmation, statements, etc., bearing directly upon the desired mental state. By passive suggestion, I mean the induction of mental states by the subtle insinuation, introduction, or insertion of ideas into the minds of others, which insinuated ideas act in the direction of inducing the desired mental state. Active suggestions are associated with the use of the motive pole of the mind of the suggester, and passive suggestions are associated with the emotive pole of the suggester. One is the masculine method and the other the feminine. Suggestion entirely emotional. And right here is a good place in which to direct your attention to a very important fare concerning the operation of suggestion in inducing mental states in others. I allude to the fact that suggestion operates along the line of emotional mentality or feeling and has nothing to do with judgment, reason, argument, proof, etc. It belongs clearly to the feeling side of the mind rather than to the thinking side. One's reason may be appealed by clever reasoning, argument, logic, proof, etc., and an effect gained. But this belongs to an entirely different phase of mental action. The induction of mental states in others by means of suggestion has to do entirely with the feeling phase of the mind. It deals with the production of emotional mentality rather than with rational mentality. This is a most important and one that should be thoroughly understood by all students of the subject. It is true that suggestion may accompany an appeal to the reason or judgment of the person influenced, and indeed is generally so used. But strictly speaking, it constitutes an appeal to a part of the mind entirely removed from reasoning and judgment. It is emotional, first, last, and all the time. And it operates along the same lines as the mental induction produced by mentative currents, as we shall see. The meaning of the term. And now, with this preliminary understanding, let us pass on to a considering of the meaning of the terms used. There is nothing like a clear understanding of the terms employed in treating of a subject. If one understands the exact meaning of the terms, he has progressed very far to an exact understanding of the subject itself. For the terms are the crystallized ideas involved in the subject. To understand the full and complete meaning of the terms of any subject is to know the whole subject thoroughly, for no one can understand a term thoroughly until he knows it in all of its relations, all that pertains to it. Let us start with the word suggestion, as used by the writers on mental suggestion. Some authorities give the broad, general definition of anything that is impressed upon the mind through the senses. But this I consider entirely too sweeping, for this definition would make the term cover knowledge of all sort. No matter to what part of the mind it appealed for, all knowledge of the outward world is obtained through the senses. Other authorities define the term as anything insinuated into the mind, subtly, cautiously, and indirectly. This definition fitting nearly the one favored by the dictionaries in defining the word suggestion in its general sense, which is as follows: a hint, a guarded emotion, an intimation, something presented to the mind directly, an insinuation, etc. But this last definition of mental suggestion does not fit all the phases of the subject. It fits admirably into the phase known as passive suggestion, as above described. But it leaves undefined the phase of active suggestion, which operates by direct, forceful command, statement, etc. My own definition. And so I must give my own definition of the term to fit my conception of an understanding of its meaning. I therefore here define my use of the term mental suggestion as follows. A physical agent inducing mental states. This is a broad definition, which I think will cover all the observable phenomena of mental suggestion. I use the word physical to distinguish suggestive agent from the mental agents inducing mental states by the operation of mentative energy, mentative currents, telemanation, etc. Of course, this distinction will not please those who would claim all mental action as a form of the physical or vice versa. But as I have to draw the line somewhere, I prefer to draw it between the physical agent and the mental, and I think that the majority of my readers will approve of this position. The word agent means, of course, an acting power or cause, etc. The word inducing, as I have used it, has been defined in the previous lesson. So again, here's my definition of a mental suggestion. A physical agent inducing mental states. Better commit it to memory. The power of words. In my use of the term physical in the above definition, I include all words, spoken, written, or printed, mannerisms, physical actions of all kinds, physical characteristics and appearances, etc., etc., etc. All these physical manifestations act as agents inducing mental states under favorable circumstances. By mental states, I mean states of feeling or emotion, not abstract ideas or manifestations of reason, intellect, or judgment. It may be urged that the use of words, spoken, written, or printed, may be employed and are employed in every appeal to the mind of another, whether the appeal be along the lines of suggestion or argument, reason, etc. Certainly, but these are not all agents inducing mental states, i.e., feeling or emotion. Arguments appeal to judgment and reason, but not to feeling and emotion, which are, on the contrary, excited or induced by suggestions or other forms of emotional induction. One may present an idea to the mind of another in a bold, forcible, logical manner, accompanied by argument or proof, but this is an appeal to reason and judgment, not to feeling or emotion, which belong to an entirely different field of the mind. Then again, many personal appeals which are apparently made to reason are really made to the emotional side. One may subtly insinuate into an argument or conversation an appeal to the feelings or emotion of the hearer in the shape of an idea, in the nature of a hint or indirect mention. And such idea will be felt by the listener, who will accept it into his mind, and before long he will regard it as one of his own thoughts, and he will make it his own. He will think that he thought it, whereas really he simply feels it, and the feeling is induced. This is a case of suggestion. The subtle insinuation. In ordinary social intercourse, you will find that women are adepts in this subtle form of insinuative suggestion as compared to men. Men will blurt out statements and ideas and attempt to prove them, but the woman will gently insinuate the idea into the mind of the other person so that, without having proven a fact, she will have managed to create a definite idea of feeling in the mind of the other by suggestion. I think I need not give examples of this fact. It is apparent to all who have mingled with people. And really, this suggestion resembles the mental suggestion of psychologists very much. It is true that the practitioner of mental suggestion in his treatments often makes of direct, forceful statements such as, "You are strong, cheerful, well, and happy." But you will notice even here that he does not argue the point or attempt to prove his statements. He simply affirms and asserts the fact. And by constantly repeated suggestions, he finally causes the mind of the person to accept the statement. So you see, a suggestion may be either a subtle insinuation or a bold, positive statement, but it is never an argument or process of proof. Impression and induction. The word impression is good as applied to the effect of a suggestion, but I prefer to stick to my own terms, and therefore I shall consider that the effect of mental suggestion is caused by induction. What you may say, I thought that induction was a term used when a mental state was set up in one by mentative currents from the mind of another. Yes, this is true, but my last statement is true also. An induced mental state is one set up by outside influence of some kind, whether that outside influence be a mentative current or by suggestion through a word, a book, a sight, or anything else. The word induce, means to lead, to influence, to prevail on, to effect, to cause, etc. And any mental state that is induced by an outside influence comes clearly under the term. Any physical agent that tends to induce a feeling in the mind of another may be called a suggestion. Even the well-known instance mentioned in the textbooks on psychology comes under this rule. In that instance, it is related that a soldier was carrying some bundles and a pail to his barracks when some particular joker yelled to him in an authoritative voice, "Attention!" Following the suggestion which induced in him the feeling preceding certain habitual actions, he dropped his pail and bundles with a crash and stood at attention, with eyes front, chin out, protruding breast, stomach drawn in, and hands at his sides with little fingers touching the seams of his trousers. That was a suggestion. Do you see the point? The lives of all of us have been molded largely by induction through suggestion. We accepted this suggestion or that one, and it changed the whole current of our lives. Certain things induced certain feelings, called into activity certain mental states, and action followed close upon the heels of feeling. Degrees of suggestibility. There are varying degrees of suggestive power, just as there are varying degrees of what is called the suggestibility of persons. That is the tendency to accept suggestions. There are people who scarcely ever act from motives originating within themselves, but whose entire lives are lived out in obedience to the suggested ideas and feelings of others. The development of the whirlpool of mentation regulates the degree of suggestibility. The man of the strong will is not so easily affected by a suggestion as is one whose will is weak and who accepts without resistance the suggestions coming from all sides. But note the apparent paradox. Persons of weak will may have their wills so developed and strengthened by scientific suggestive treatment that they may become veritable giants of will. Ideas induced by feeling. The careful student may feel inclined to ask me at this point why I speak of suggested ideas when I have said that suggestion has to do with mental states of feeling and emotion. Are not ideas, he asks, something connected with thought after then with feeling? The question is a proper one, and I must meet it. The word idea comes from the Greek word meaning to see. In its general use, it means a mental image or a general notion or conception held in the mind. An idea is symbolic image held in the mind. It is a symbol of something thought or felt. Ideas are not formed by thought alone. Feeling contributes its share of these mental images. To tell the truth, the majority of people scarcely think at all in the highest sense of the word. Their reasoning and logical faculties are rudimentary. They accept their ideas at second hand or second hundred hand. Their thoughts must be pre-digested for them by others, and the handed-down idea is the result. The majority of ideas held in the mind of the race arise from feeling and emotion. People may not understand things, but they have experienced feelings or emotions regarding them and have consequently formed many ideas and ideals therefrom. They do not know just why an idea is held by them. They know only that they feel in that way. And the majority of people are moved, swayed, and act by reasons of induced feelings rather than by results of reasoning. I am not speaking of intuitional feelings now, but of the plain, everyday emotional feeling of people. Feeling versus reason. Do you know what a feeling is? The word used in this sense means a mental state, emotion, passion, sympathy, sentiment, susceptibility, etc. And emotion means an excitement of the feelings. The feelings belong to the instinctive side of our mind rather than to the rational of reasoning side. They spring up from the subconscious strata of the mind in response to the exciting cause coming from without. The instinctive part of our minds are stored with the experience, feelings, emotions, and mental states of our long line of ancestors, reaching away back to the early beginnings of life. In that part of the mind are sleeping instincts, emotions, and feelings, our inheritance from the past, which await but the inducing cause to call them into activity. The reason or judgment by means of the will act as a restrainer, of course, according to the degree of development of the individual. And these outward agents, if of a physical nature, are suggestions of all kinds. Look around you at the world of men and women. They tell me whether they seem to be moved principally by reason or feeling. Are their actions based upon good judgment and correct and careful reasoning? Or are they the result of feeling and emotion? Do people do things because the things are considered right in the light of reason, or do they do them because they feel like it? Which produces the greatest motive force, an appeal to the reason of a number of people, or an appeal of their feelings and emotions, which sways a gathering of people, the votes of a people, the actions of a mob, reason or feeling? Which moves even you, good student, reason or feeling? Answer these questions honestly, and you will have the key of suggestive influence. The 4 lines of action. Mental suggestion produces its effect upon the minds of people along one or more of 4 general lines or paths of action. All the phenomena coming under this head can be placed in one or more of the 4 classes. These 4 paths or lines of action, along with mental suggestion, operates are as follows. 1. Obedience. 2. Imitation. 3. Association. 4. Repetition. I shall now proceed to consider these 4 paths or lines of action separately in order and in detail. Beginning with the first mentioned line of action, let us consider the first line of action. Suggestion through obedience. Suggestion operating along these lines consists of the induction of mental states, etc., by the agency of a positive statement, assertion, assumption, authoritative attitude, etc., which so impresses itself upon the mind of the person suggested to that he sets up no opposition or resistance, but acquiesces quietly to the suggestion made to him. The most common form of this first form of suggestion is seen in the very general acquiescence to real or pretended authority on the part of the majority of people. Such people, hearing a statement made positively and in a tone of conviction by some person in authority, they accept the statement, and the feeling arising from the accepted statement without resistance and without any attempt to submit the matter to the exercise of their reason. And this is true not only when the person speaking has really a right to speak authoritatively, but by virtue of his knowledge, experience, and wisdom. but also when some pretenders sets up an appearance of authority and speaking in a positively style along the "thus said the Lord" manner impresses his hearers with the idea he wishes to suggest to them. And then the good folk meekly acquiesce without question and allow their feelings to be aroused accordingly, for the feelings are generally followed by actions in accord therewith. Man, an obedient animal. It is astonishing, from one point of view, to see how obedient to this form of suggestion the masses of people are. They will allow their mental states, feelings, and emotion to be induced by the impudent statements and claims of cunning, shrewd, and designing men, as well as by ignorant, self-deluded fanatics, who thus influence and sway them. These self-constituted authorities utter their oracular statements and opinions in a tone of absolute certainty, and the crowd takes them at their own valuation. It seems to be only necessary for some positive man to attract the attention of the people and then make some bold claim or statement in the proper manner and tone and with their appearance of authority, and lo, some of the people at least fall into line. Did you ever think that people as a rule are obedient animals? Well, they are, providing you can manage to impress them with your authority. It is much easier for them to acquiesce than to refuse to do so. They find it easier to say and think yes rather than no. Their will is not often called into action by their reason and judgment, it being too often entirely under the control of the feeling and emotional side of them. The origin of obedience to suggestion. There is a fundamental law under this phase of suggestive action, and in order to find it, we must go back to the beginning of the race, perhaps further. In the earlier days among animals and men, there were natural leaders who ruled by force of might of body or mind. These natural leaders were implicitly obeyed by the masses, who had learned by experience that it was better for the tribe or herd as a whole to be governed by their strongest and sharpest-witted members. And so gradually, this dominant idea of acquiescence and obedience to authority developed and became a fixture in the race mind. And it is firmly planted in the mind of the race today, so much so that only the strongest minds are able to free themselves from it to any great extent. It is authority here and authority there in law, letters, religion, politics, and every other field of human endeavor. People do not begin by asking themselves, "What do I think about this matter?" but instead start off by saying, "What does so-and-so think of it?" There, so-and-so is their authority, who does their thinking for them, and they take their keynote from him or her. The authority induces their mental states for them. If these leaders and authorities were really the wisest of the race, it would not matter so very much, although even then it might prevent the development of individuality in the masses. But the worst feature is that the majority of these authorities don't know, and know that they don't know. But the people haven't found them out. They assume the manners, air, appearance, etc. of the real thing. And the people, being accustomed to these symbols of authority and mistaking the imitation article for the real, are impressed by the authoritative utterance and accept the suggestion. The confidence man. This fact is well known to the classes that prey upon the public. The confidence man, in and out of the criminal class, assume this air of authority, and their suggestions are accepted by people. They are good actors, That is one of the requisites of the suggestionist, and these people understand the law. They proceed upon the theory accredited to Aaron Burr. That remark, you may remember, was that the law is that which is boldly asserted and plausibly maintained. And so these folk keep on boldly asserting and plausibly maintaining and find that it generally goes. Extreme instances. To see a principle in its naked simplicity, one should look for its operation in extreme instances. And the extreme instance in this case is the hypnotic somnambule who was surrendered his judgment entirely to the mind of the operator. The somnambule will acquiesce in the most absurd suggestions from the operator and proceed to carry them into effect. And suggestion, is the active factor in hypnotism. The hypnotic condition being only a psychological condition in which the effect of suggestion is heightened. But one does not have to go to the ranks of the somnambules for striking illustrations, for such are to be found in all walks of life among people who have no individuality of their own, but who seem to live and act entirely upon the say-so of others. They have no quality of initiative, but must always be told just what to do and how to do it by others. These people will accept almost any kind of suggestion, if made by others in an authoritative tone and manner. They do not have to be persuaded by argument, but are fairly driven and ordered to do things by stronger-willed persons. They are impressionable and sensitive, and seem to have no wills of their own. These people are very suggestible, and every day's history records many startling cases of the effect of suggestion through acquiescence on the part of such people. The keynote. The keynote of this form of suggestion is a positive statement or command, given with the air and appearance of authority. The secret of the effect is the tendency upon the part of the majority of people to acquiesce in an authoritative statement or command rather than to dispute it, and the tendency toward thinking yes rather than no. Those easily affected. The form of suggestion is to be observed in the highest degree among those who have always depended upon others for orders or instruction and who have not had to use their own wits and resources in life. Unskilled laborers and the sons of rich men belong to this class as a rule. These people seem to need someone to do their thinking for them, even the smallest events of their lives, and are most suggestible along these lines. Then the degree of suggestibility along these lines decreases as we ascend among people who have had to do things for themselves and who have not depended upon others so much. It is the slightest among people who have had the ordering of others to do or who have had to depend upon their own wits in getting through life. The men of marked degree of initiative have scarcely a trace of this form of suggestibility. Initiative, is a term for doing things without being told, using one's own wits and resources, the true American spirit, which so many Americans lack. The degree of power. The degree of power in giving this form of suggestion depends materially upon the development of will on the part of the suggester, and also upon his assumption of the appearance, manners, air, and tone of authority, the latter requisites being the outward symbols. If one has the willpower strongly developed, the symbols will appear of themselves as a natural consequence. But to those who have not the developed willpower and whose authority is more or less counterfeit, the assumption of the outward symbols becomes a matter of great importance, and these people devote much study to the cultivation of these outward forms. And these counterfeit symbols, the art of the actor, serve their purpose to impress and suggest to the crowd, and their assumers set up a very brave front and obtain a very fair degree of success in the part they are acting. That is, until they come in contact with a man of real willpower, when they gracefully retire after the first clash of mentative swords. To those who are negative and who are too susceptible to this form of suggestion, I advise the cultivation of willpower, which will be fully taught in the concluding lessons of this series, called Character Architecture. Nothing but the cultivation of the will render them positive and impervious to suggestive influences of this sort. The second line of action. The second line of action of mental suggestion is that called suggestion through imitation. And this form of mental suggestion is very common, perhaps the most common of all the forms. Man is essentially an imitative animal. He is always copying the actions, appearances, and ideas of others, thereby going to prove his descent from the monkey-like ancestors in whom this trait of character was largely developed. Personally, I believe that this trait of imitation may be traced back to the early days of the race, or before, when animal and men were in a wild state and exposed to constant danger of attack of enemies. Then a motion of fright on the part of one would be communicated to the others of the tribe, and gradually the trait of instinctive imitation was developed, the traces of which are still strongly with the race even to this day. We may find instances of this trait all around us. When we watch a tightrope walker, our bodies instinctively sway in imitative motion. When we watch the faces of actors on the stage, our own faces work in sympathy, more or less. And so it goes on all around us, and in us, ever the tendency toward imitation. Children manifest a great degree of this trait and copy and acquire the mannerisms of those around to a surprising degree of detail. Human, sheep, and apes. This form of mental suggestion is very common. People are constantly taking up the suggestion of the mental states, feelings, and emotions of those around them and reproducing them in their own acts. The majority of people are like human sheep, who will follow a leader everywhere and along all sorts of paths. Let the old bellwether jump over a rail, and every sheep in the flock will do likewise, and they will keep on jumping over the same place, at the same height, even if the rail be removed before the whole flock gets over. We are constantly doing things simply because other people do them. We are constantly aping after others in our fashions, styles, forms, etc. We are servile imitators. Larry Herr shows a vest button hung by a thread, and all the young apes in the land follow suit. Funny, isn't it? Imitative mental contagion. This law of imitation plays an important part in the phenomena of mental suggestion along these lines. Somebody does a certain thing, and at once other people take up the suggestion and copy the original actor. Let the newspapers record a certain crime, and many others of the same type follow closely after. Let there be a suicide, and many others follow, usually adopting the same method. Let there be a number of cases of some kind of folly and dissipation, and immediately there is an epidemic of the same thing. Let the papers say much about the appearance of a new disease, and at once a number of people manifest symptoms of it. Diseases get to be quite the fashion in this way. The feelings and emotions of the instinctive part of the mind are called into sympathetic action along the lines of imitative suggestion, and physical effects follow shortly after. Shrewd men take advantage of this tendency of the human mind, and by getting a few people interested in certain things, they manage to set the fashion, and the crowd follows like sheep. Get people talking about a thing, and the contagion spreads until everybody's interested in the matter. The majority of people are more or less susceptible to this form of suggestion, the degree depending upon their habit of thinking, judging, and acting for themselves. The man or woman who has ideas of his or her own is not so apt to be impressed by every wave of popular fashion, style, and thought as those who maintain a more negative attitude toward the minds of others. The method of curing an undue tendency toward imitative action is to start in to build up your own individuality and to develop positivity along the lines mentioned in the concluding lessons of this series. The third line of action. The third line of action of mental suggestion is suggestion through association. This form of mental suggestion is very common. It is based upon the acquired impressions of the race, by which certain words, actions, manners, tones, appearances, etc., are associated with certain previously experienced mental states. Mental states take form in physical action and expression. As we know, a man feeling in a certain way is apt to express himself by certain actions or in certain words. These actions and words thus become symbols of the mental state producing them, and consequently they produce upon the mind of the person seeing or hearing them the mental image connected with that mental state. And this mental image is calculated to induce a similar or corresponding state in the mind of the person seeing and hearing. So that these symbols are really mental suggestions, since they tend to induce mental states. Words but symbols. Right here, I wish to remind you that every written, printed, or spoken word or words is the outward and physical expression of some inner mental state of the person uttering or writing the words. The words are the outward and visible signs of an inward feeling. Remember this always. Mere words in themselves have no suggestive value. The value depends upon the meaning impressed upon them by the mind of the person using them, accompanied by an understanding of their meaning by the person hearing or reading them. The word horror, for instance, or uncanny, has a definite meaning to persons familiar with it. It bears a direct relation to a mental feeling or emotion and is the physical and outward expression of the same. One may say the word over and over again to a person who has never heard it, or to one of another race who does not understand the term, and no suggestive effect follows. But speak the word to one who is accustomed to connect and associate it with a definite feeling that they have experienced, and the feeling will reproduce or induce if the circumstances of the use of the word be favorable. The word love, used properly, will awaken in the mind of its hearers feelings corresponding with the term. And these feelings must have been experienced before, either directly or indirectly, before they may be induced by suggestion. Feelings experienced by one's ancestors leave a record in one's subconscious mentality, which may also be induced by the appropriate suggestion. Personally, words seem to me to be like the wax record of a phonograph. The record is covered with minute impressions produced by the sound waves entering the phonograph. Place this record in its place in the phonograph and start the latter in motion, and lo, the minute impressions on the record will reproduce or induce in the diaphragm the same kind of sound waves that originally caused the impressions. In this way, a word, which is the physical symbolic record of a feeling, will produce its associated feeling in the mind of the person hearing or reading it. Associated feeling. And as I have said, the feeling produced will depend largely upon the understanding of the meaning of the word held by the person receiving the impression. For instance, in the case of the word love, let us suppose that the term is strongly and feelingly suggested to a number of persons at the same time. And in the same way, you will find that the feeling induced in the one person will be that of love of parents, in another love of children, in another love of husband or wife, in another love of God, in another an exalted affection to some person of the opposite sex, in another the low animal passion for one of the other sex, and so on. Each experiencing a feeling occasioned by his or her association of the word with some feeling previously entertained. The same word may induce a feeling of the greatest pleasure in one person and the greatest horror or disgust in another, the difference depending upon the association of the word in the mind of the two persons. As an illustration of this last statement, take the word passionate, for example, or the word pious. I have dwelt upon these facts in order to make clear to you that there is no magic power in words in themselves, and that all their force and effect depends upon the associated feeling of which they are the crystallized physical and outward form or symbol. The word is the body, the feeling is its soul. The art of the suggester. And so it is with the suggestion of appearance, manner, surrounding, etc. Each of these depends for force and effect upon the same accustomed association with some inner feeling, which feeling is reproduced or induced by the outward symbol of the thing. We associate certain things with certain feelings, and when we see these things, we are apt to experience the feeling indicated. People have been overcome by the sight of a picture or a scene in a play, a song, a poem, or suggestive music. And here's where the art of the suggestionist comes into play. He watches closely and discovers that certain words, tones, manners, appearances, actions, motions, etc. are associated in the minds of people with certain feelings and ideas. And so when he wishes to reproduce, produce, or induce in others these ideas or feelings, he simply reproduces the associated physical symbols in words, manner, motion, or appearance, and the effect is produced. The conjurer makes certain motions with his hands, which you have always associated with certain actions, and you feel that the action itself has been performed. But the conjurer omits the action, and you are fooled. The confidence man assumes the appearance, manners, and actions which you have always associated with certain qualities of character, and you feel that he is what he seems to be. But he isn't, and you are fooled. This play acting of people is all a form of suggestion. And you are fooled because you accept the symbol of the reality unless you understand the game. The actor assumes the actions, tones, dress, and words of certain characters. And if he is a good actor, you forget the reality and laugh and weep and otherwise feel that what you see is reality, although you really know underneath it all that it is only a play. And all this is mental suggestion, remember. The master key. Remember, now and always, that a mental suggestion operates by the presentation of the outward symbol associated with the feeling to be induced. Put the right record in the phonograph, and the corresponding sound is produced or induced. Do you see? This law underlies all the phenomena of mental suggestion. Understand the law of suggestion, and you have the master key to the phenomena. The spell of oratory, and other forms of appeal to the feeling by spoken words gives us a typical example of the operation of this form of mental suggestion. The orator, the lawyer, the preacher, each uses words calculated to induce mental states, feelings, and emotions in the minds of his hearers. Such a one soon begins to learn the suggestive value of words, tones, and expression. He avoids the use of cold, abstract words and drifts into the use of those which are symbols for deep feeling and emotion, knowing that these words, symbols uttered with the proper tone and expression, will induce the feelings for which they stand in the minds of the hearers. The hearer's emotions and feelings are played upon in this way like an instrument. The emotion or passion, whether it be love, fear, hate, greed, patriotism, courage, jealousy, sympathy, etc., etc., is awakened by the skillful use of the words, tones, and expression which stand as symbols for these feelings. If you will remember how you were touched by an address that afterward seemed trivial and flamboyant to you, without argument, proof, or sense, then you will realize how you were made the subject of mental suggestion through association. The skillful salesman operates upon you in the same way. So does his twin brother, the advertising man. The revivalist has this art reduced to a perfect science. The power of words. Words, words, words. Inciters to action, inducers of feeling, symbols of mental states, and reproducers of mental states. Despise them not. Sneer not at them, for they have brought down low the mightiest of minds when properly used. Even when written, their potency is great. Countries have often been made captive by a clever phrase, which when analyzed meant nothing in reason, merely an awakener of feeling. Let me make the catchphrases of a country, and I care not who makes its laws. The actor. The man best adapted to employ this form of suggestion is he who is more or less of an actor, that is, who possesses the faculty of throwing expression and feeling into his words, actions, and manner. Good actors, pleaders, salesmen, and others have this faculty largely developed. It belongs to the feminine side of the phenomena, for it has the charming, drawing, leading aspect and works by the employment of the emotive pole of mentation, rather the will or motive pole, as in the case of this first mentioned phase of suggestion, that of authoritative statement or command. It operates not by beating down the will of the person, but rather by inducing a sympathetic rhythm of feeling and emotion which overpowers his own will and causes it to act accordingly. How to protect yourself. One should ever be on guard against this kind of influence. The best way to escape it is to adopt the policy of never acting immediately in response to an appeal of this kind. Rather wait until the effect has worn off and then submit the matter to the consideration of your reason and judgment. Of course, the cultivation of willpower will act as a shield or armor, protecting you from the subtle vibrations of this kind, for this form of suggestion is usually accompanied by strong mentative currents from the mind of the speaker. Fence yourself off from a too ready response to sympathetic appeals along the emotional lines. Lead the headstand by the heart, ready to prevent its running away with you. Men should have the reason in the ascendant, not the emotional nature. When you feel yourself being carried off your feet by some emotional excitement, steady yourself and ask your mind this question. Is this not a mental suggestion? The question will tend to bring you to your state of equilibrium. When you know what a mental suggestion is, then you will learn to recognize them and be on the lookout for them. This state of mind will act as a strong neutralizing agent for the most skillfully put suggestion. Have your torpedo nets out no matter how secure you may imagine yourself to be. One caution more: be especially cautious and slow to accept a suggestion when you are worn out, tired, or in a passive, pleasurable state. That is, whenever your will is resting or else exhausted. On these occasions, when in doubt, say no. You will save yourself much regret by remembering this bit of advice. It is based on a proven psychological law. I have learned this law by bitter personal experience. Remember it. The fourth line of action. Let us now consider the fourth line of action on mental suggestion. Suggestion through repetition. This form of mental suggestion is quite common, and the study of its manifestations is quite interesting, for it brings into operation a well-known psychological principle which has its correspondences in the physical world. Constant dripping will wear away the hardest stone. You know the story of the man who told his favorite lie so often that he believed it himself? Well, this is a psychological fact. People have started in to make a certain appearance of truth in words or manners by assuming something to be true that was not so. Then they kept on repeating the thing, adding a little here and a little there, until the thing got to be a fixed idea with them, and they actually believed it. And if a person can suggest himself into accepting a false belief in this way, you can see how it will operate on others. The secret of this form. The secret of the operation of this form of suggestion lies in the psychological facts of weakened resistance through repetition of the attack and the force of habit. The first time an unaccustomed suggestion is made, the mind sets up an active resistance, but the next time it is presented, the suggestion is not quite so unfamiliar as before, and a lessened resistance is set up, and so on, until at last no resistance is interposed, and the suggestion is accepted. You know the old verse. Quote, "Vice is a monster of so frightful mien, that to be hated needs but not be seen. But seen too oft, familiar with her face, we first endure, then pity, and then embrace." End of quote. And this rule holds good with suggestions. We first resist them, then endure them, then accept them, unless we understand the game. Cuckoo feelings. The psychological fact involved in this form of suggestion is that impressions upon the brain cells become deepened by constant repetition. It is like sinking a die into a cake of wax. It goes deeper at each pressure. The mind is very apt to accept as true anything that it finds deeply impressed upon its records. It has become accustomed to finding these deep impressions only when they have been made by repeated efforts of its own intellect or judgment or experience. And so when it finds these deep impressions that have been placed there by repeated suggestions of others, it is not apt to discriminate. It finds itself feeling these things that have been repeatedly impressed upon it, like the cuckoo's eggs in the robin's nest. These illegitimate mental impressions are nurtured as one's very own. Mental impressions. There is a constant struggle for existence upon the part of the ideas or mental images impressed upon one. The strong crowd out the weak. And in the majority of cases, the strongest ones are those which have either been impressed in a vivid manner or else by repetition. The second time you meet a man, you may have trouble in remembering him, but the third time it is easier, and so on, until at last you forget that he has ever was a stranger. And so it is with these suggested ideas. You grow familiar with them through repetition. They lose their strangeness to you, and at last you cease to concern yourself about them, A strange thing is generally inspected, examined, viewed suspiciously, but after the strangeness has worn off, you cease to exercise the former caution. Familiarity breeds contempt and also lack of caution. Suggestion gains force by each repetition. This is one of the fundamental laws of suggestion, and one that all should remember. The force of repeated statements. If you would like to take mental stock of yourself, you would find that you entertain a vast number of feelings, ideas, and opinions which you possess simply through this law of repeated suggestion. You have heard certain things affirmed over and over again until you have become to accept them as veritable facts, notwithstanding that you possess not the slightest personal knowledge of it or any logical proof concerning them. Shrewd molders of public opinion employ this law and constantly repeat a certain thing in varying words and style until at last the public accepts it as a proven and unquestioned fact. Many a man has gained a reputation for wisdom merely because his friends repeatedly affirmed it and the public accepted the suggestion. Many a man has had a reputation built up for him by friendly newspaper correspondents, whose constantly repeated suggestions have caused the idea to crystallize into a material form in the public mind. And many a reputation has been destroyed by the repeated shrugs, sneers, and insinuations of gossips and evil wishers. Advertisers understand this law and keep the repeated suggestion of the merit of their wares constantly before the public mind until it becomes gospel with the people. If at first you don't succeed, and never take no for an answer, are two axioms very dear to the heart of the man who uses suggestion in his business. A warning. Do not be deceived by this subtle form of suggestion. Do not imagine that an untrue thing becomes true because it is repeated often. Do not allow your judgment to be lulled to sleep by this drowsy repetition of the slumber song. Keep awake, keep awake. An understanding of this law of suggestion will throw light on many things that have puzzled you heretofore. Think over it a bit when you have time. The three forms of application. Let us now consider the various forms of application of suggestion in everyday life. There are several, and for convenience, I separate them into three forms or groups. 1. Involuntary suggestion. 2. Voluntary suggestion. And 3. Auto-suggestion. Let us now consider the first form. The first form, involuntary suggestion. By this term, I mean the use of suggestion involuntarily, without a particular purpose or unconsciously. We are all giving suggestions of words, manner, action, etc. every moment of our lives. And these suggestions are constantly being accepted by those around us. We are constantly influencing those with whom we come in contact, the great part of the work being performed unconsciously to us. We are acting as living inspiration for some and living discouragement for others, according to circumstances. Our moods, actions, words, appearance, manners, etc. act as suggestions to those around us. I am not now speaking of the effect of mentative currents, etc., but of mental suggestion, pure and simple. A business house is permeated by the personality of its head, and his personal characteristics impress themselves upon those under him by the means of suggestion. He sets the gait of the place. He is active and enterprising, so are the workers employed by him. And if he is careless and shiftless, so will they be apt to be. We affect those around us by our mental attitudes manifested in action, and they affect us if we allow them to do so. Children and suggestion. Children are quite amenable to suggestion of this sort, being natural imitators, and they soon take on the mental attitude of the parents toward them. If the parent treats the child as being beyond control, the child will respond. If the child be considered obstinate, etc., he will take on the suggestion and the original trouble will be magnified. People talk before their children, little realizing that the little minds are very suggestible and are constantly taking suggestive color from those around them. One should endeavor to present to their children only the best, positive, helpful, uplifting, and encouraging mental states. One should avoid giving the child the impression that it is bad or mean or deceitful or shy or anything of that sort. The child will be apt to accept the suggestion coming from a source that it naturally looks to for information, and it will be very apt to proceed to act upon the suggestion and make the words of the parent come true. I have heard of children who had become so impressed with their parents' suggestion that they would come to some bad end yet, that they had to fight against it the balance of their lives. Sow the suggestive seeds that you desire to sprout into reality. Be careful to select the right kind. This subject of suggestion to children can be merely alluded to here, for it would fill a book of itself. I felt impelled to say a few words about it in this lesson because my experience has taught me its extreme importance. The rule of involuntary suggestion. This is the rule of involuntary suggestion. Our words, actions, manner, tones, appearance, and general personality convey suggestions to those around us, inducing mental states in accordance therewith. Therefore, act out only the character that you wish to impress upon the world, and act it the best you know how. The world will connect you with the part you are playing, according to the suggestion thus made. Sometimes you will get a better verdict than you really deserve, sometimes a worse one, but in either event, your mental attitude, reflected by your involuntary suggestions, will have caused the verdict, whatever it may be. Therefore, form a correct mental attitude based upon some ideal of the part you wish to play, and then play it out to the best of your ability. Observe the outward appearance of the part you are playing, for this is what the world sees first, last, and all the time, and you are judged by your suggestive makeup and stage action. Act well your part, for thereupon rests the verdict of the audience. The second form. The second form of the application of suggestion is voluntary suggestion. This form of the application of suggestion is manifested in cases in which the suggestion is deliberately and purposely made with the ending of impressing other persons. Its manifestation may be grouped into three classes as follows: A. Suggestive treatment. B. Hypnotic suggestion. C. Suggestion in the form of personal influence. Suggestive treatment. By A. Suggestive treatment, I refer to the practice of mental suggestion used as a form of treatment by physical ills or mental deficiencies, etc. The treatments for physical ills come under the term of suggestive therapeutics and will be spoken of in my lesson of that title. Treatment by suggestion for mental deficiencies, etc., is a branch of science that is rapidly coming to the fore. For some time, it was clouded by its mistaken connection with hypnotism, but now that it has been divorced therefrom, it is being used to a much greater degree by scientists in all parts of the world. Its principle rests on the fact that brain centers and brain cells may be grown, developed, and increased by properly directed suggestions, so that one may be practically made over mentally. New qualities may be induced, and objectionable ones decreased. Objectionable habits and traits may be eliminated, and desirable ones substituted or newly induced. The wonders of this form of practical psychology are being unfolded rapidly, and a great era is before us in this branch of science. I have conducted many experiments along these lines with a surprising degree of success during the past 7 years, and I purpose making the results of this work public at no distant date. The broad principle of the treatment lies in the fact that the mental states induced by the proper suggestions tend to exercise and develop the portion of the brain in which they are manifested. Hence, the theory once understood and the best method adopted, the rest of the treatment becomes as simple as developing any muscle of the body by the appropriate exercise. I call this form of treatment brain building by suggestion, etc. Hypnotic suggestion. B. Suggestion in hypnotism is a subject that I shall merely refer to here, for this is not a manual of hypnotism. Sufficient it is to say that hypnotism is a combination of the use of mentative energy in a certain form, coupled with suggestion. The will of the hypnotic subject is overpowered by mentation, and the suggestions are then made him. It is a proven psychological fact that in the hypnotic condition, all suggestions have a greatly exaggerated effect, and a suggestion that would scarcely be noticed in the ordinary state becomes a strong motive force to one in the state of hypnosis. In this state, the most absurd suggestions are accepted and acted upon. The most extraordinary delusions are entertained, and the suggestions of future action, or post-hypnotic suggestions, are made effective. I shall speak further of this subject in my next lesson on person influence, but I wish to caution my students against allowing themselves to be hypnotized for experimental or other purposes. It is conducive to a negative condition, and I heartily disapprove of its use. I would not allow anyone to hypnotize me, and I would urge upon my students a similar attitude toward experimenters. The best effects of suggestion may be obtained without hypnosis. The latter is merely an abnormal and morbid state, most undesirable to normal people. Let it alone. C. Suggestion in personal influence is referred to in other parts of this lesson and will appear more fully in my next lesson on personal influence, for it belongs to that phase of the general subject. The third form of application of suggestion is what is known as autosuggestion. By this term is meant self-suggestion, or suggestions given by one to his own mind. This is a most interesting and important phase of the subject, and will be dealt with fully in my last lesson on mental architecture, under which head it falls. It is by autosuggestion that so many people have made themselves over mentally and have become that which they willed to be. Its principles are precisely the same as in the other forms of suggestion, except that the treatment is given by one's self instead of by another person. The vehicles of suggestion, the voice, the manner, etc., have been alluded to in this lesson as we proceeded, but these points will be elaborated in the next lesson on personal influence, as they form a part of that subject. Feeling versus reason. An eminent teacher of the use of suggestion in commercial pursuits, in speaking of the effect of suggestion in inducing mental states, says, "You can make a man think with you if you work on his feelings or higher nature, even though you run counter to his ordinary judgment. If in this way you can dazzle his reason sufficiently, you can spur him to almost any action of which man is capable." And this teacher is perfectly right in his statement, although he follows the old subjective mind idea and identifies feeling with the higher nature, instead of treating it as belonging to the emotive pole of mentation, as I do. And if I may be pardoned, I would suggest that the above statement would be a little nearer the true state of affairs if he had said, "You can make a man feel with you if you work on his emotive mentality," etc. The psychology of salesmanship. The teachers of business psychology very ably instruct their pupils in the art of suggestion in the process of making sales. They instruct the salesman to first gain the prospective customer's attention, then arouse his interest, then awaken desire, and then close the sale. These steps in the psychology of salesmanship apply equally well to the science of advertising or any other appeal to the minds of people and are logically correct. The attention once gained, the mind becomes more or less receptive. The mind once receptive, interest is aroused and a greater degree of receptivity is induced. Interest is gradually led to desire, induced by the subtle suggestion of words and the exhibition of the article to be sold. And at last, when the proper psychological state is aroused, the trained salesman gently but firmly gives the positive suggestion of authority or demand, pointing to the place where the customer must sign his name, thus using suggestion along both the lines of acquiescence and imitation, and the order is taken. Did you ever subscribe to a book at the solicitation of a good book agent? Well, if you did, and will let your mind run backward over the proceeding, you will see how the above rule works in practice. Number 1, attention. Number 2, interest. Number 3, desire. Number 4, sale. These are the steps of salesmanship by suggestion and advertising sales as well. Great is suggestion in business. I have known salesmen to gently suggest the closing of a sale by handing the customer a fountain pen placed at the suggestive slant, at the same time pointing to the space on the order blank with the "take it for granted" tone and utterance, "Sign right here, please," and it was signed. Agents' suggestions. The largest employers of agents have regular training schools in which the new agents are given the benefit of the experience of the old hands at the business, and some of these old hands could give a professional suggestionist points on his own science. The agent is told how the different classes of people act, the objections they will be likely to raise, and how the trained agent may overcome these obstacles by clever work, including, of course, an intelligent use of suggestion. I have talked with many successful men in this line, and it has always been a source of wonder to me at the detail of the use of suggestion manifested by them in their work. The average person would be surprised at the ideas advanced and the knowledge possessed by some of these men. One of these agents once told me that one of the first things he learned when starting to work was that the agent should never permit the customer to take his prospectus or sample pages in his own hands. He said to me, "I always keep the prospectus in my own hands, for if I let it get away from me, I will have lost the power of controlling the attention and interest of the customer. He will then have the matter in his own hands and will have gotten away from me. He will then do the leading instead of my doing it. I always keep the upper hand of my man or woman. I do the dealing, guiding, directing, and influencing myself. I keep the controlling gear in my own hands always." I wish I could take the space and time to tell you other things I have learned in this way of suggestion in business, but this is not a treatise of suggestive salesmanship, and so I must hasten on. I trust that I have said enough, however, to give you the proper cue in that matter. Advertising suggestions. And in the science of advertising, also, there is a constant use of suggestion, usually conscious and premeditated. This is taught in the courses and schools of advertising, and the ad men are well grounded on the subject. The use of the direct command, as the ad man call it, is very common. People are positively told to do certain things in these ads. They are told to take home a cake of Hinky Dinky's soap tonight. Your wife needs it. And they do it. Or they see a mammoth hand pointing down at them from a sign and almost hear the corresponding mammoth voice as it says in painted words, "Say, you, smoke honey dope cigars. They're the best ever." And if you manage to reject the command the first time, you will probably yield at the repeated suggestion of the same thing being hurled at you at every corner and high fence, and honey dope will be your favorite brand until some other suggestion catches you. Suggestion by authority and repetition, remember, that's what does the business for you. They call this the direct command in advertising schools. Illustrative examples. And then there are other subtle forms of suggestion in advertising. You see staring from every bit of space on billboard and in newspapers and magazines. "Want a cracker," or something of that sort, and you usually wind up acquiescing. And then you're constantly told that the babies howl for Grandmother Hankins' infantile soother, and then when you hear some baby howling, you think of what you have been told they're howling for, and then you run and buy a bottle of Grandmother Hankins. And then you're told that some cigar is generously liberal in size and quality, or that some kind of cocoa is grateful and refreshing, or that some brand of soap is 99.999% pure, and that some pickle man makes 763 varieties, etc., etc. Only last night, I saw a new one. Somebody's whiskey is smooth, and every imbiber in the car was smacking his lips and thinking about the smooth feeling in his mouth and throat. It was smooth, the idea, not the stuff. And some other whiskey man shows a picture of a glass, a bottle, some ice, and a siphon of seltzer with simply these words: "Old boy's highball." That's all. All of these things are suggestions, and some of them very powerful ones too. When constantly impressed upon the mind by repetition, they get in their work on you. The psychology of advertising. A writer on the psychology of advertising advises, among other things, that advertisements are articles to eat or drink and should contain the words calculated to induce the feeling of taste in the minds of the readers: sweet, refreshing, thirst-quenching, nourishing, etc., etc. How suggestive they are, and how effective. How do they act, you ask? How? Well, this way. Just you read these words. A nice, big, juicy lemon. Tart and strong. I can taste it now. Just imagine these words accompanied by a picture of a man squeezing the juice of a lemon into his mouth. And where are you? I'll tell you where. Your mouth is full with saliva from the imagined taste of the tart lemon juice. Now isn't it? Tell this to some of your friends and see how it works. I heard a story once of a bad little boy who would stand in front of a German band with a lemon to his mouth, sucking away for all he was worth. Result, the mouths of the musicians became filled with so much moisture that they could not play on. Exit boy with Professor Umpa, the bass horn player, in full pursuit. They are being filled with Dunner and Blitzen, and worse. See? Business psychology. I have known of dealers in spring goods to force the season by filling their windows with the advanced stock. I have seen hat dealers start up the straw hat season by putting on straw themselves, their clerks ditto, and then a few friends. The sprinkling of straws gave the suggestion to the street, and the straw that hat season was opened. Do businessmen understand suggestion? Well, rather. Even the newsboys understand it. The best ones are above asking, as the green ones do, "Want a paper, mister?" Or worse still, "You don't want a paper, mister, do you?" The good ones say instead boldly and confidently, "Here's your paper, mister," sticking it under your nose, and you take it. Let me tell you a tale about a barker at a pleasure resort in Chicago several years ago. He was the best I ever heard. Here is the story. It's a true one. A striking example. This man was the barker or spieler for one of the attractions of the place, the pony ride attraction. Many were the ponies lined up to carry the children around the ring for a nickel a ride. The spieler would wait until a crowd of children, with or without their parents, would enter the place, and then he would begin in the strongest, most strenuous, rasping, suggestive tones. "Ride, ride, ride, have a ride, take a ride, have a ride, take a ride. Anybody, everybody, anybody, everybody, ride, ride, ride. Everybody rides, 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 rides. Take a ride, have a ride, take a ride, have a ride, take a ride, have a ride. Anybody, everybody, anybody, everybody, ride, 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 ride." He would keep this sort of thing up for several minutes, apparently without taking a fresh breath. The very air seemed to quiver and vibrate in the rhythm of his ride, ride. And every child within hearing who could raise a nickel would surely ride. The word ride, positively, authoritatively, and constantly repeated, was one of the most startling exhibitions of this form of suggestion that I have ever seen or heard. I have heard many imitators of the spieler, but have never met his equal. Perhaps he has now passed on to some higher form of usefulness. He was worthy of it. He was on to his job, surely. Suggestion accepted. I have seen men in bowling alleys caused to make false plays by some bystander suggesting the false shot. The same thing is true in shooting galleries, etc. You have but to look around you and see these everyday instances of suggestion in some form or other. Induced feeling, remember, that is the key of all manifestation of suggestion. Look out for it. And in conclusion, I know a little boy who exemplified the law of suggestion one April Fool's Day by placing a sign in the coat tail of another boy. The sign read, "Kick me," and they did. Suggestion among lawyers. The skillful lawyer uses suggestion in his work in examining or cross-examining witnesses. He suggests things to a suggestible witness and coaxes and leads him on to admissions and statements that he did not intend making, sometimes statements that are not strictly correct. Such a one will say, "You did so-and-so," or "You saw so-and-so, didn't you?" etc. The direct statement made in an authoritative manner, causing the suggestible witness to acquiesce. Look out for this confident authoritative manner in lawyer or anyone else. It is calculated to lead one into acquiescence, for man is an obedient animal, and it is so much easier to say yes than no when you see that yes is expected. A dangerous use. It is charged that police detectives have worked false confessions out of suggestible criminals in this way, by keeping hammering away at them until their wills are worn out, and they would say yes, to escape further questioning. Like the girl who finally accepted the lover's repeated proposal in order to get rid of him. This firm, decided authoritative statement or demand, when allied to the law of repetition, has caused much mischief in the world, and many have given into it, to their sorrow. I trust that these warning words will save some others trouble of this kind. When the law is once understood, it is comparatively easy to escape the suggestion. The strength in the suggester of this kind lies in the ignorance of the person suggested. Forewarned is forearmed in this case. You now begin to see my idea in turning on the light, don't you? The suggestive question. I have heard of businessmen who would instruct their clerks to ask questions of their customers in this way. You like this pattern, do you not? Or, this is a beautiful shade, is it not? Etc., etc., etc. Do you see the point? The statement is made first, and the question is asked right on top of it. Isn't it easier to say yes than no to this kind of question? See there? Now I ask the question in that way myself, although I had no intention of doing so. Took my own suggestion. The suggestive position. In this connection, I may add that it is a well-known psychological fact that when two persons are conversing, the one standing or sitting higher than the other has the advantage of a certain positive attitude or position, and the person seated below the speaker is forced into a relatively passive or negative condition or position. That is, everything else being equal, the person elevated will be positive to the other, and the one seated on a lower level will be passive relatively. The raised platform of the teacher, speaker, preacher, etc. has a good psychological basis, and the power that a lawyer feels when talking on his feet to the jury seated in front of him is a manifestation of a law that he may not be aware of. But the judge has one better than him, for the lawyer must look up to him when he talks. Try the experiment of practicing the above position with some friend, first one being seated and then the other, and see how you can actually feel the difference between the two positions. The raised position of clerks in the large stores and the low seats so accommodatingly placed for the customers have good reasons. If you ever feel that someone is placing you in a negative or passive condition, rise to your feet, and you will feel doubly strong and forceful. This is a little hint that may be worth many times the price of this book to you some of these days. Look over the fool things that you have been talked or influenced into, and see if you are not seated and the other fellow standing, or seated higher than you. This is a little thing, but it works big results sometimes. Better heed it. Different degrees. There is a great difference in the suggestibility of persons, some being almost immune from suggestion, while others are so suggestible that they have but to be told the thing in a positive, forceful, confident, authoritative tone and manner to accept the suggestion, particularly if it be repeated several times. They will likewise readily absorb the suggestions of imitation and association. But I have told you about this elsewhere in this lesson. Study those around you, and you will soon discover the different degrees. The hypnotic somnambule is at the extreme negative end of the scale. Suggestion and personal influence. And now, friends and students, we have come to the end of this lesson on mental suggestion. As you will have learned by this time, the subject of suggestion overlaps the subjects of several of the lessons to follow, this being notably true in the case of the next lesson on personal influence. But it was necessary to make you acquainted with the general nature and effects of suggestion and with its laws before taking you to the lesson on personal influence. Having now studied suggestion, you will be the better prepared to understand the subject when you meet it in the instruction on personal influence. Suggestion deals with the physical agents of mentative induction, while personal influence deals principally with the mental agents. But the two agents generally work together in personal influence and therefore must be studied in connection with one another. You will see this more plainly as you proceed with the study. The importance of suggestion. But here, a word of caution. If you desire to learn the mental forces, do not ignore the physical agents employed in suggestion. The physical agents appeal to the sense of man, while the mental forces reach another avenue of approach to the mind, and both are important. Of the two, suggestive influence is the most easily produced and, in fact, is generally the first invoked by skillful users of mental influence because of its simplicity and its faculty of preparing a good foundation for the other influences. In your study of the subject of personal influence, you must first thoroughly post yourselves on the laws underlying the phenomena of suggestive influence. This is the first toward the understanding of the whole subject. A good suggestionist is always a master of mental influence because his very knack of suggestion brings the mentative influences into operation. Suggestion brings about the proper mental attitude for the higher phenomena. End of Lesson 3. Okay, this was very intensive, yet if you have time to digest it, you will see how much of what this author has said you have seen in your own life. Have you ever bought something because of some suggestion? Maybe from an advertising that caught your attention, or maybe from a conversation with a friend that made it sound really worth purchasing. I've always thought that in life, whether, intentionally or not, there's always a relationship of buying and selling. From the little child trying to negotiate with mother about why he should have the cookie, to the bigger transactions of purchasing a home or other big items. You know what I mean, right? Before we head over to the next video, be so kind, leave me a comment, let me know you were here. It means the world to me.